Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you're interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. This podcast will educate and inspire with stories of entrepreneurs' journey, and we also explore their why. You will learn from successes and failures to be the best version of yourself. Today we have Henry Lopez, who is a serial entrepreneur and small business coach and consultant and podcaster. That isn't on your bio when with your details, but the podcast is massively important to you. We're going to go deep into that. So I've already, just transparency for my audience, I've known Henry for a couple of years now. We were on a podcast mastermind. He has an amazing podcast, which is all based around small businesses, and he has a wealth of experience and knowledge in this area. So thank you very much, Henry. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, Mark, pleasure to be here with you. Thanks.
Right. So the podcast is called The Absolute Business Mindset. For you, I ask all my guests, what does a business mindset mean to you?
That's a big question. That's a deep question. I think a business mindset to me, if I had to boil it down, is how do I, as an entrepreneur, put together a venture, an opportunity that makes a profit? So to me, the business mindset is about making a profit.
Would you describe yourself as an entrepreneur or a business owner?
I aspire to be an entrepreneur, but I think the reality is I'm probably a business owner.
Okay. And that's because you usually focus on one business at a time, is it, rather than a couple?
No, because I'm being very stringent on the definition of an entrepreneur. To me, an entrepreneur is someone who truly is not involved in the day-to-day of that particular business, at least until after the launch, and has a portfolio of businesses that are generating income, whether I'm on the beach somewhere or whatever I might be doing. And I think there are times when I can call myself that, and other times when I call myself a business owner, which is where you're more at the level where you're more involved to some degree in the day-to-day operations. No shame in either, right? And not being that. But I like to think of myself as an aspiring serial entrepreneur.
So it sounds like it's a little bit of rich dad, poor dad definition. So an entrepreneur would have businesses that they're could be completely hands off from, but they've built up, and then where a business owner, this, for my definition, is someone that is usually the practitioner as well, or the technician as well as the business owner as well.
Yeah, or it could be that you're playing the CEO role, but you're still an active part of that business, right?
Yeah.
To some degree. And speaking of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that was one of the first most impactful books on me on just understanding money, understanding wealth.
There's a few of them that I've, through my entrepreneurial journey, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the EMyth was also very impactful, and Profit First. I actually had a guest on who was an accountant, and he said, no, you have to read Profit First. It is really important. And look, there's hundreds of books, thousands of these books, but for me, those three were very pivotal for me to work out how I wanted to run my businesses and how I wanted to sort of build that the business, the legacy, the opportunity as well. So do you have a favorite book? Which one, apart from Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Oh gosh, I have so many books. I'm staring over here at a stack of current books.
Well,
I'm a big
you can
reader.
See right behind me.
Yeah, exactly. But those three you mentioned are foundational. One of the questions I ask almost all of my guests across 400 or so guests now, is a book recommendation. The EMyth is by far the number one recommendation.
Right.
So yes, that definitely is a good one. Seth Godin is a big one for me. Any of his stuff, his book Purple Cow really helped me crystallize how to deliver remarkable customer service. I read that just as we were launching our self-serve frozen yogurt restaurant, 15 years ago. And it really was the foundation for what I believe is in delivering customer service. So that's another foundational book for me.
Yeah. Seth Godin's amazing. I think I've got a bit of a man crush on Seth Godin. I think that Purple Cow was incredible. Just differentiating yourself in a crowded market is so important.
Yeah. And then Gino Wickman, he's written several books.
Oh,
Traction is a good one. I'm very connected to the Entrepreneurial Leap book that he just recently released on the criteria that he believes to be an entrepreneur. Hey, that's hence why I have that separate definition between what is a business owner and what is an entrepreneur. Yeah. Because he talks a lot about that. So his writings have been very influential to me as well.
Amazing. Tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
Oh, that's very simple. I am a son of Cuban immigrants. So as with all immigrant populations, all immigrant peoples, our parents leave behind, everything and come with the hope that we have a new opportunity. They leave behind everything that they had, education, jobs, careers. And so they have to be resourceful and entrepreneurial to make it in the new world. And so that has no choice but to rub off on us. And it's no surprise why in small immigrant communities like ours, the Cuban immigrant community in South Florida, is one of the homes of the most small businesses in America, or a number of small businesses, because of that entrepreneurial spirit. My grandparents had to reinvent themselves. They had to figure out what to do to make a living. So I saw my grandfather learn how to fix washing machines and these kinds of things. So that's the influence, no doubt, that indirectly is part of why I'm a business owner.
And were they from Castro's time? And
Correct. Yep, exactly. So because of Castro, they had to become refugees and leave Cuba.
What were they before in Cuba? What was their jobs or careers?
Oh, different levels. Nobody in my immediate family was certainly wealthy. They were all either working class or below. There was some money in one section of the family where they owned a dairy. And so that part of the family had a little bit more affluence. So they probably left behind the most as far as what they had built over generations. In the case of my grandfather, my mother's father, he actually worked in the Batista government. And so he had to go, or he might have been rounded up and accused of, all sorts of different crimes. So he left. He actually came by himself. This is while before Castro closed the gates, if you will, right? In those in-between years, he came by himself, got a job, got established, rented a home, and then brought the rest of the family.
Wow.
I wasn't born yet, as my mom was only 19 at the time.
Right.
When she came over. The big tragedy in our family is that their oldest son, my uncle, who was at university, he was bought into the whole revolutionary movement at the time, and he stayed.
Wow.
So that was our family drama growing up. All of my childhood is, we've got a call to Nene was his name, his nickname. And so whenever they would get a call to Cuba to talk to him, that was the big event, right? And so my grandparents always lived with that incredible joy and pride of having been able to come to this country and provide for their family. The first time my grandfather ever owned a vehicle was here, and had a home of his own. But with that longing for that son that they left behind. So that was our drama, not unlike in a lot of immigrant families where that some semblance of that story gets repeated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think you said about Cuban immigrants. I think immigrants as a whole, especially in America, are very entrepreneurial, very
Absolutely.
go-getter, it's very interesting to contrast it with the UK. So I'm based in London, right? As people often know. There's a big Asian community, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. And yes, they are entrepreneurial, some are, but they value education. So they want their children to be doctors, to be lawyers. And I find it's really the whole immigrant cycle is a very interesting one, because Indian communities value education so critically important to their culture. Through the noughties in areas where I lived and similar areas, a lot of Eastern European came over, so Albanian, Romanian, people like that, and they were very entrepreneurial tradesmen. So often plumbers, electricians, those sorts of things. But they were very happy to start their own businesses and build their businesses that way. I always find it very fascinating, the immigrant story. And you see this often throughout America, different type immigrant groups coming to America, believing in the American dream, and then really sort of uplifting even their lifestyle and things like that, to be able to uplift themselves, their family, their future generations as well. It's a fascinating story.
It is. I mean, in my opinion, it's the story of America, and many other countries as well. But I think it's part of what makes our country great.
I would 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. Right. Let's talk about your podcast. So what is it called? What's it about? How long have you been doing it? And who do you interview?
I launched it in 2014. So just episode 460 something, I think it is now. I do a weekly episode except for Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's called The How of Business. So The How of Business is just about that, about talking about the actionable stuff that helps people either get started or grow a very small business. One of the reasons I started it, and initially I had a co-host every once in a while, he still comes back on. He was my business partner at the time, David Begin. And we talked about books that we read and periodicals, and it seemed like most of that content, while it was great and I love it and I still consume it, was about the outliers, the unicorns. And I always was challenged with, well, how do I translate what Steve Jobs is doing at Apple to my tiny little pizza shop, right? And so I always thought that there's always a space for people who are talking to it at the micro business level. And so that's what I try to do in my show. I do so primarily through interviews of other experts or business owners that are sharing their journey or a specific specialty or knowledge, or sometimes I'll just discuss a topic myself. And I've been fortunate, I didn't think about this initially, but I've been fortunate now to find that most of my episodes are fairly evergreen. People can go back and listen to them, and they're still just as relative today. My conversation with David about partnerships 4 years ago is still just as applicable today for someone who's thinking about partnering with someone, as an example. So it's The How of Business. You find it at thehowofbusiness.com. And it's a weekly episode. My episodes run about 45 minutes or so on a weekly basis.
So something I've been fascinated, and as I said, we've known each other for a couple of years now, and I've never asked this question, but it's been a burning question. If Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk reached out to you and said, I love your podcast, I want to be on your podcast, would you accept them as they are owners of large businesses, not small businesses?
Yes.
Is that because of the boost that you'd hope to receive?
That would certainly be a huge benefit. No, of course, that would be fantastic. Yes. But no, because I think that I would hopefully be able to ask a few questions that I would want to ask of them and that my audience would be able to maybe learn from. So I would love that. More would be the challenge of what good question could I ask them from a small business owner perspective that maybe they haven't been asked a million times before. I would be terrified. I'd be a nervous wreck. I'd be intimidated. But yeah, that would be why I would want them on.
But would you really be like, I don't know, I've probably done 250 interviews. I've done 400 and something episodes, a lot of solo stuff at the early doors. But the podcasts I've listened to, so I've listened to some of your solo stuff as well as some of your interviews. And just as a key note, I can't remember what number it is. There was one about profit and loss and your forecasting, and that really was massively important. It was probably over a year ago I listened to it, but it was really impactful. The level of detail that you went into is like 35 minute, very expert, very knowledgeable. So great stuff there. But on your interviews, do you think if you had someone who was a couple of levels up or quite a few levels up, do you not think that because I'm fascinated by this, you seem very skilled and very prepared for your interviews. Would it be that much of a would it be that much of an intimidation to ask them those types of questions?
I would ask them. I'm very good at masking it. I have a lot of practice of being on stage and pretending like I'm not nervous, but I have imposter syndrome just like a lot of other people do. Yeah. And I just interviewed a gentleman yesterday who is a very successful venture capitalist. And there was a little bit of that I think crept in as I was getting ready for it. Once I got into the conversation, I was fine and I did my thing, right? And I learned from it. But yeah, I am still sometimes that person, that kid. And this went with me through my entire sales career in the 90s when I was up on stage presenting. Would somebody would point out and say, I know you're a fraud, right? So I struggle, you talk about mental health often, and I don't know that maybe this falls completely in this category, but I've struggled with that my entire life and career. And we can dig in. I know the source of it. We can do that another episode.
Let's try it.
Yeah,
let's unpack
well,
it.
it's the relationship with my father, right? It is at the heart of it. So I was never enough there. There was never any pride. He never shared with me that he was proud. So I was always trying to please him or impress him. Yes. Right. And I think that a lot of people who end up like me have a difficult parent or parents or some sort of situation. So then I've spent the rest of my life trying to fill that void. And while I do consider myself a confident person, there's nonetheless those times when it creeps in, when I feel like, what the heck do I know? Starting the podcast was that way. Even to this day and age, sometimes when I go to do a topic episode, I'm like, do I really know enough about this subject? And then I get into it, I do it, and I realize, I've shared enough here that somebody is going to learn something, and that's all that I'm trying to do. Yeah. I'm not trying to put myself forward as the expert or the be-all, know-all. So yeah, that's where it comes from. Going back to how we got off on this tangent, yeah, there are people that I think I would be intimidated, but I think I would gather myself and ask a Zuckerberg the questions that I would want to ask and have pride in doing so.
So is your father still alive?
No, he passed it's been about 15 years now. He died of cancer in his early 70s.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it was rough.
Who do you now look to get that admiration, to get that approval from now?
It's a good question. I think that what I've learned in life is that what really matters to me is the people whom I love and respect. What do they think of me? So right now, that is a circle of people that includes my wife and my daughter. I just have one child.
Right.
And so what they think of me is what matters most.
I got asked this morning, I was at a networking event this morning for breakfast, and I was doing a presentation about my real estate, my property side. And the general question, they do a few intro questions. And one question which I've been asked quite a few times in different mediums is, if you could tell your 18-year-old self something, what would it be?
Oh,
now, my
gosh.
question, my answer always is, it will be all right. Like, just tell your 18-year-old, because at 18, you're just starting university, or even 21, you've left university. You haven't got a proper relationship. You haven't got a proper career, job, business, whatever it is. Just tell that 18-year-old self that it will be all right. It will be fine. What would you tell your 18-year-old?
Oh, Mark, it's almost identical, because I was such an anxious 18-year-old. You know, at that age, my parents had gotten divorced. My dad had disappeared on us. That's when I was 17. I was the oldest of three. So my mom, who had been a housewife for 18 years, had to go get an hourly job. I had to do the same to kind of keep our household standing, pay the bills. So I was at a point where things were very dark. I couldn't see the future. So very much the same advice. But I'll extend it this way. It's what I've came to learn later on in business. And it was an epiphany for me as it relates to when we were starting the frozen yogurt business. I made a promise to myself that for that one, I was going to enjoy the journey.
Right.
So I'm answering the question in a long-winded way. In business, typically what I find is that we are influenced, taught, learn that we don't celebrate until, like with the yogurt shop, my thought is I'd have 200 units franchised and then we'll celebrate. Then it'll be a success. Instead, what I've found in business is that we need to celebrate the journey, the process of it, the fact that I have the privilege to be able to dabble in business, to do this, to have this opportunity. So similar to yourself, I would have said to myself, it's going to be okay. You're going to figure this out. Yep. Enjoy this time because it goes fast, and enjoy the process. All of it is part of it. That's what I would have told myself in part.
And we're getting very deep here, but I'm going to talk about death, because I've suffered bereavement, multiple bereavements in my family. And an 18-year-old self was very fearful of death.
Really?
But it wasn't until I read Marcus Aurelius, Stoic, I can't remember the book that he called. And so I've sort of struggled with a religion. So I do believe in God. I don't believe in God. What's coming after? And I was quite fearful of that at a relatively young age. But I read that book, and such relief came over me when I realized that the thousands of years before I was born, it was all fine. Like I didn't exist, and therefore I had no consciousness of where I'm. We're very lucky to be in this life, in this world, with this technology and with all these things around us. But when I die, if there is heaven, fantastic, I'll celebrate it. But even if there isn't, I won't be aware of it. And therefore, there is no tension to be worried about it, because it will be nothingness. And I wasn't expecting us to go in this level, this angle, but that for me was such a relief to just realize that my mother and my father are both passed away. They're fine. They're not in pain. They're not in, I don't believe they're in purgatory or anything like that. But it's a very weird concept. I know Gary Vee has talked about this over the years, that death is the real leveler. You really, like, once you're gone, you'll be remembered. I've mentioned this earlier. You're remembered probably for 3 generations. Your current generation, your kids and your grandkids. After that, you're probably not going to be remembered. Yeah. But that whole essence of that, there's nothingness afterwards, and that will be fine, was something like, have you struggled with sort of death and sort of your concept?
Sure. Yeah. That scariness as well is existent for me, because again, I don't have a definitive answer to what happens. And I think that as humans, we often need that. But yeah, that worries me. I'll tell you, as it relates to this, when I first had to deal with this was my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, who were the ones who were the immigrants as well.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad's side, they were Cuban as well, but I had more to do with my mom's side of the family. When they passed, that was really hard for me because they were influential. Yeah. But one of the ways that I started to accept, understand, process death is that the beauty of it is that people live on in the people that they influenced. 100%. So they live on in us, right? Yeah. Because we are a part of them, not just in the DNA, but in what they imparted on us, what they left on us, what they helped us become. And so that's kind of how I look at it, is if I can at least have an impact on my daughter, then that's the best that I leave behind, is the positive impact that I've had on her. But yeah, no, it's a thing that, especially I'm a lot older than you. I'm 59. So you start to get to my age, you do start to think of the end chapters, right? But yeah, it's something that I do give some thought to. But that's kind of how I have left it for me, is that we live on in the people that we impact and love.
100%. Is there retirement in your future, Henry?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're an online business owner and you want to learn what's working right now to generate leads, grow your following, and get paying clients and customers, then be sure to check out the Digital Trailblazer podcast. Each week, we feature online business owners just like you who are launching and scaling their businesses, and we reveal exactly what they're doing to rise above the competition to build a successful, profitable online business. And what's really unique about the Digital Trailblazer podcast is that you're going to learn these strategies directly from the business owners who are putting them into action and getting results. So head over to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, or just head over to digitaltrailblazer.com for links to all of our episodes.
No, not in the classic sense. I want to be able to be creative the way that I describe it, and being part of something as long as my mental faculties allow me to do so.
Right. Let's zoom back. Let's talk about, initially you did sales roles. You mentioned this a little bit earlier. And do you think, because often I hear this from lots of guests that have become really successful, and a lot of them start in the sales arena because you get such resilience, you get the no's, and you keep going and you keep driving forward to get those sales to be successful. I equally think it's very entrepreneurial because there is a method of profit or earnings based on your performance, which is
I mean, you either produce or you don't. It's very black and white.
Yeah. So what do you think for you, the sales roles that you did early in your career have sort of impacted where you are now?
Yeah, definitely the things that you're touched on, but also perhaps even more so is the ability to communicate persuasively, effectively. I think that's the skill that is most beneficial. And whether you gain it through sales, which is a great way to do so, or not, we have to be able to effectively persuade others to our point of view, to our idea, to our project, to why you should invest in my business, to why we should all work together to finish this job, whatever it might be. You might call that leadership qualities, certainly, but I have found that the people who are more effective at communicating, that seems to be one of the common denominators among successful people. Not always, but one of the common denominators. So I realized early on in life that it was a natural ability that I had. And then through my sales career, I was able to develop that skill. Others helped me develop that skill to become a strong communicator. Yeah. So I think that's the big takeaway, the big benefit of it.
So let's move forward again. So you've had a salon in Texas, you've had a car wash business in Denver, you've had a frozen dessert place in Colorado. And as you said about the difference between entrepreneur and business owner, once you've invested in that business, whether you're interacting daily, making decisions, or whether it's a little bit more hands-free, at what point in those examples, you can pick one or if there's a theme across them, at what point do you say, I've done what I want to contribute in this business, I'm going to leave? Do you sell? What's the sort of process towards the end of those bits? We're just having a quick break from the episode today. Thank you so much for joining me today. What I want you to do is, can you do one thing for me? Can you go and text one of your friends a link to the show, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or any other of the podcast providers, and text a friend of yours that you love this show and they should be listening to it. It's a simple request, and I really would appreciate if all you do is give that text to a friend, family member or colleague. And lastly, if you do want to see more information about the podcast, go to absolutebusinessmindset.com. Right, back to the interview. Businesses.
Yeah, great question. And you know, Mark, more and more these days, it seems like everybody is focused on going into the business, knowing what your exit strategy is. I had never heard that term early in the 90s. Now it's all the rage, right? What is your exit strategy? And that's part of how I had never heard of that. But it makes a lot of sense to me, especially in partnerships, right? I mean, when I started my partnerships early on, I never had those conversations. My very first business, which was a pizza franchise with a partner, I thought at the time, we're going to conquer the pizza world. We're going to own 60 units. But we never talked about it, and then we will sell. No, we never had those conversations. But to answer your question, what I evolved into is a reality that the part that I enjoy the most is the creative part, the building part. Then once a business gets stable, I enjoy making sure that business has the systems in place to make it repeatable, the EMyth stuff, right? So the fact that even if it's just one location, you run it as if it's a franchise. And I've very much bought into that. I love systems. So, but then once that point, depending on where it might go, I think I start to get a little bored. Okay. And I'm looking for the next challenge. My biggest challenge, my partner and I have both of this, I call it the shiny object syndrome, is what's the next thing that catches our attention, right? And I'm not saying that's a good path. No. I don't know that it was good or not.
I think it's an entrepreneurial sort of hazard.
I think so.
You're thinking of the next project.
Yeah, and people come to you with ideas, and you get excited, and so you say, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Let's go do that." And then you get the fear of missing out. What if I don't do that and somebody else does? So a lot of that happens. So I've always thought from early on, everything's for sale, except for, myself and my family. Everything has a price on it, because what I'm building are assets, hopefully, and those assets eventually always have a price on them. So that's the way I've always looked at it. So the pizza franchise, I ended up having 3 units. One of them I resold successfully. The other one we sold but didn't make much money. The other one we had to shut down. The salons I bought, those are existing businesses that I bought, ran them for 6 years, and then sold them successfully. The car washes, I got into it with my partner. He had established washes. We built a third one together, and then we sold them. So that has been the pattern. I think that as a business owner, and I advise people on this because this is the biggest decision a business owner has to make sometimes. Here I have a successful business. I have an opportunity maybe to sell. Do I sell it or do I keep writing this? And the thing is, the input that sometimes we get, like from financial people who are not business owners themselves, by the way, is, well, if you sell it, then where are you going to put that money to give you the same return, and all of that stuff. But this is what I look at. I look at, if somebody is, typically somebody's offering you a multiple of that profit that you're making on an annual basis to keep it simple. Let's keep it simple. Let's say it's a 5 multiple. So in essence, someone's telling me, I'm going to give you what you would have potentially made over the next 5 years. I'm going to give it to you now. You're out. You have no more liability. Versus, but I could keep it, make that, and then some, but I have the liability. So I always consider that factor, that in business, nothing is guaranteed. Yes. I don't know what might happen 2 years from now. I don't know what might go wrong. I can't predict the future. So that is another reason why I'm always will consider the right opportunity to sell.
Which one do you miss the most?
Good question. Which business do I miss the most? I think that the car wash business, for me, we sold too early, but it made sense for my partner, who was the principal partner. So I would like to still be in that business.
And you've sort of touched on it there. Well, let's talk about the Levante Business Group. So you do this consulting, you do this coaching side to help small businesses. So why don't you just tell me a little bit more about that business?
Sure. Levante Business Group is just my holding company. It's who owns the podcast, The How of Business. It's the company through which I offer my one-on-one business coaching, which is one of the things I do. That's part of what the podcast hopefully attracts, is people who listen to me. They like what I have to say. They like my approach, and then they engage me as a business coach. I do some consulting, but on a limited basis, because that can take up a lot of bandwidth. So I only do that for people that I know. So it's mostly business coaching and the podcast, and then courses, workshops, affiliate relationships, all of that falls under the Levante Business Group
and
umbrella.
You've been prolific on affiliate.
I've really explored that significantly over the last few years. It's really been a great opportunity that the podcast has afforded me now that I've gotten it to where it's at. And that's been a great way to generate win opportunities for myself and my affiliate partners.
Something that I've talked to someone else about was this whole idea of win-win. And you mentioned that just now. And I think that's a rite of passage, not just for men, but for boys and for girls as well, is that instead of thinking of I win and you lose, that's the way with sporting metaphors, for example, is often it's based upon. But actually, you grow up and you realize that actually we both can win in those situations.
Right.
So you touched on that win-win scenario. So give me an example, a story of how your sort of rite of passage to realize that actually in this world, win-win solutions are the best way.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I definitely consider myself a competitive person. My daughter will tell you that I've told her that it is about competition, that it's not enough to win, others must lose. But it's in a joking manner. In other words, I want her to be competitive, but I realize also that there's room for multiple parties to win. And I think that what I have found, and you have as well, Mark, over the years, is those partnerships, arrangements, businesses, deals, whatever, where everybody walks away happy are the most fruitful, not just from a financial perspective, but just about how we feel about them, how we feel about them, and how when you do that, how much it pays off later on when one of those parties comes back around and says, you know what, Mark, I'm coming to you, or I want to work with you because remember when we did so-and-so and you were fair, you were square, you were looking for all of us to win. I think that applies so much there. It applies in partnerships. My partner, David Begin, as we've talked about so many times, what does it take to be in a good partnership? One of the things he says that I believe very much in is we have each other's back. So that's another example of a win-win in a partnership. In other words, we never go into 50-50 partnerships, by the way. One of us always has an advantage purposefully. But we trust that we have each other's back, that not regardless, even though he could be in a position of leverage, we want it to be win-win. So I think that those are all of the ways that I have come to realize, and with age comes the reality of seeing the benefits of that. That could be, for example, I can still talk to the gentleman that I sold my salon business to now, I don't know how many years ago, 2014, I think it was, and I still feel good about that. I still feel good that I got a fair price. They got a great business. I was transparent in what they were getting. The transaction was conducted as ethically as possible. Sure, there was a negotiation and there were tense times in that negotiation, but I didn't burn anybody, right? It was a win-win situation.
So I've had successful partnerships. I've had unsuccessful partnerships as well. And so what for you, it sounds like your consistent theme is that you like partnerships and working with other people and your business partner having your back, which is really super important. So, but what for you, and interested in this not 50-50, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah.
What for you makes a successful partnership, whether it's a long-term one with your business partner or whether it's doing something with a project with someone for a short term as well?
Good. Okay. Well, since you added that last qualifier, I do think there is a difference, because to me, when I'm talking about partnership here and what I think makes for a good partnership, I'm talking about when I'm going to own a piece of a business with someone else, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily an affiliate relationship, but we have a loose partnership that we can uncouple very quickly. There it isn't as impactful, right? Because you and I might know each other briefly. We might come into an affiliate relationship, but if it doesn't go well, we can separate. But when I go into owning a business with someone, now I'm married to them for some length of time, and there's money at play and all kinds of things. Yeah. So there's three things that I've boiled it down to. One is trust. Yeah. The other is respect. And the third is communication. And there's a lot that goes into all three of those.
Wow. That's big.
Yeah. That's the foundation of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the trust and respect for me takes time to develop. So I have never been in partnership with someone that I haven't known for some period of time.
Right.
Just that. Now, that doesn't mean I won't, but I haven't so far because that hasn't been there. That doesn't mean I won't bring in an investor into a deal that I don't know, but that's an investor who doesn't have any controlling interest over my business or how we will conduct business. So the trust and the respect. Now, people often ask me, can I accelerate that? Sure. There's all kinds of stuff that's been written about how to accelerate and see if someone is trustworthy or not. But that has to be there. The respect has to be there. And that's one of the reasons, for example, that I'm also not a fan of bringing in a partner just because what they're bringing to the table is the money. I think that can be fraught with issues because you have to respect their abilities, their other skills that hopefully they're bringing that complement yours that they're bringing to the business as well. If it's just money, they should be an investor, not a partner. Yeah. So that's a clarification I make there. So trust, respect, and then communication. And the communication part where people make the biggest mistake, I'm talking about ongoing, but very importantly, upfront. My number one download on my website is what I call the partnership checklist. Now, I used to call it memo of understanding. And I've added to it over time. This partnership checklist it's almost everything that would be an outline of a partnership agreement.
Right.
And so it facilitates before you go into partnership, before you sign anything, it facilitates having those conversations that most people avoid. The hard conversations, like, I'm in business with you, Mark. If you die, do now I have to be in business with your wife, or can I buy out the shares from your estate? If I do, at what strike price? How will we calculate that? Will we have an insurance policy in place to facilitate that? When your kids come of age, are you expecting that they're going to do an internship in the business? Well, I may not want that. Let's talk about those things now. If you get divorced, what happens? If you are incapacitated, what happens? What do we do in the business then? All of these things. What if you want out? What if we get crosswise and you want out? How do we do that? How do I allow for you to sell? Do I have the first right of refusal on your shares? All of those things are things that people usually do not talk about, understandably, when you're in that honeymoon phase. You can't imagine that anything's going to go wrong between us. We've been buddies forever. We're excited about this business. We couldn't be more enthusiastic. And we overlook these things, and then it pops up later. And then you don't just say, well, let's amend the agreement, because I may not want to amend the agreement at that point in time, right? So that communication is the early part of it. That has to be boiled into a proper operating or partnership agreement, and then talking to each other on a regular basis, because we get out of alignment. Yeah. Let's talk about exit strategy right quick. We may have gone into it thinking, well, we're going to grow this into a multi-unit franchise, but 5 years into it, maybe I'm getting burned out on it. Maybe I have a different idea and I want to check out or do something different. So that's the communication part. So those are the three-legged stool, if you will: trust, respect, and communication.
So true. And my experience is before I go into business with someone, I don't rush into it. And I've had failures as well as successes. But
as have I. Yep.
Yeah. But I try and get to know the person. And something I have learned also is that it's not that you have to be the same age as the other person, but if people are in different phases of their lives, it can cause certain tension. So one may have kids, young kids, one may not, or vice versa, or there's also other conditions. But I think what I've tried to do is try to get to know the person and their values and what they stand for and what their work ethic is and what they want, what they aspire to. It's not foolproof, absolutely not, but it's a way of trying to mitigate it. And also something I actually don't go to the formal route straight away. What I tend to do is say, look, sometimes set up a company, sometimes not. Let's work together,
Right.
and sort of in a year's time, if everything is going well and we've actually started a business rather than a business idea, then we can formalize it, and then we can get the things in place which protect both of us. I often start things quite informal because you'll get an idea in 3 or 4 months whether this is actually working. And communication is so critical. And if someone feels that the other one's not pulling their weight or they're going in a different direction. So I actually start things relatively informal. So there is that break clause relatively quickly, and you'll work that out in, my experience, 3 to 6 months, you usually work out whether you're compatible and moving in the same direction. And then I formalize things and then put things in place. And as you say, things like you want to leave early or you become incapacitated or die or whatever. So I've actually taken a different approach because a lot of the stuff I do is it's more of a service that I provide people,
right,
rather than a product or a business, as in like a restaurant or something like that.
And in real estate, you might work a transaction, which
Yes.
is much more micro, and you might be able to work it together in a much more informal way.
But
right?
Interestingly, people that I've done joint ventures with and sort of planning to do joint ventures with, in that sense, on owning a property together, I have gone down the formal route.
Sure.
Because that really worries me. If we hold on to a property for 2 years, I might want to hold on to it. What happens if they want to sell up and do something different or put their money into another, or they've got another opportunity? So on those sorts of deals, I've very much gone through a formal route, because when you're providing a service, you can break quite quickly and you can carry on still doing the service. When you're dealing with something that's tangible and you can touch it, I think you do need to formalize those things just to protect both of you. And I've been advised to get mediators or get people that you agree to be a mediator, to, if there is those. It's not even a disagreement. It's just a different approach to where we're going with things.
Right.
So,
now, I know in real estate, 50-50s are much more often, but what is your position or thought on 50-50 partnerships?
So with real estate, it's a little bit different, because in real estate, I think I've gone into and sort of proposed and gone into relationships with joint ventures where I'll do the sweat equity, is what we call it in the UK, and then some people put the money in to actually do the deal completely hands-free. They don't want to speak to solicitors. They don't want to speak to estate agents or sources. They don't want to get involved in that side, but they want to make a return, and you agree your return, your exit strategy. So it's very big on exit. So something I'm working with at the moment, or working on at the moment, is that someone puts the money forward. I do the sweat equity side. We either, at the end of the refurb, we sell to make a profit, or it's currently what the situation is with interest rates and being high and causing property prices dropping.
Right.
We've got an exit strategy after 1 year or 2 years to then make that, once the economy's bounced back, we can then make the profit that we expect and we want from that deal. So it's very much being able to work out what those exit strategies are. We still need a mediator if it goes differently, if we decide, but there's definitely exit 1, flip it and sell it. Exit 2, hold on until the recovery. And we often do it in 1 or 2 year cycles after that. So for me, it needs to be formalized, because that whole aspiration of, they might want to make a quick profit and put their money into another deal. And that actually has its benefits, because we can flip it and sell it and then maybe do the same thing again and make the profit, and you just recycle the process.
Sure.
So I found that's been successful and useful for me as well. But that would be more, if I've not gone into 50-50s on going into property at the moment, often because my skill set is based on being able to buy, refurbish, deliver a property. So that's my skill set, which I can bring to the table. If I'm then doing that as well as putting a substantial amount of money in as well, then where is the sort of equality in what they do? And equally, do you know what? It's actually easier when it comes to real estate that one person not makes the decisions, but does the day work, and someone else doesn't. Because if you're then, I always think, like, if you're making decisions on the kitchen and you're refurbing a kitchen and the investor wants to be involved in the day-to-day, they're going to be scrutinizing, well, is the kitchen good enough? Is it right? Does it fit the demographic? And there's all these things that are contributing to those sorts of things. So I'm usually, I don't even mind doing it the other way. If people have got the skill set, I would be happy to do it that way. But what I've often found is that when you're looking at sort of the project management of a refurb, you need someone to be knowledgeable to be able to make those decisions and not be squabbling over taps, or bathtubs and things like that. That level, you don't need that sort of impact. So I've often found the successful ones are when someone makes the decisions and other people put predominantly most of the money into the deal.
Understood. Yeah.
But I want to talk to you about assets. So we've talked about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. We've talked about owning businesses. So what excites you in assets? Do you own property yourself? Real estate yourself?
I have dabbled in the past. Real estate has always been of interest to me. In fact, that's one of the things I did for a period of time in the early 2000s. I went and got my realtor license. I was dabbling in residential real estate, did some flips, had some rental properties. But I learned pretty quickly that for me anyway, if I couldn't get it past a certain number, it was just a lot of work. Yep. So we've sold all of our individual rental properties, and now I only do so through funds. So as an investor in different real estate funds. Yeah. And REITs. So that's, different REITs and other funds that act like REITs. And I've got a diversity there, different types of funds. And so that's how I'm investing in real estate now at this point in time. I always dabble back and forth, buying here, buying there, but that's where, as far as real estate, that's how I'm putting my money in the market now.
And what about other assets? Do you
so I have traditional investments, right? So in monies in retirement accounts, in equities, and I have a portfolio. I've got two different guys that kind of manage two different piles of the money, of the little money that I have across a portfolio of investments. So that's the money that's there for later. And, then I look at the businesses that I invest in as part of my assets as well. Right now, other than what I'm doing with the Howard business and the related businesses, I'm a minority partner in a franchise that my cousin started. I was his coach, and he started. It's a franchise called Office Evolutions, which is a co-working space. And so I'm a minority investor and partner in that. So I'll look for those kind of opportunities. Yep. And then I'm about to continue to invest in a business that I'm helping my daughter build in the vintage fashion industry. And so that's where a lot of my focus is going to go to later this year.
That's very interesting. Vintage fashion. So a friend of mine, I've lost contact with her. She worked with me in corporate for a lot of the years. She was actually a Czech, so from Czech Republic. And she moved back. She lived in London for 6 years or so, was moving up the career ladder, moved back to Czech Republic, and then just went, I don't want to do this project management, dealing with clients. And she actually set up a vintage store in the middle of Prague.
Wow.
And she was prolific at one stage. I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram now, but I did for a while. And she was prolific on like taking pictures of her friends in the clothes, looking like she was having a lot of fun. Is it scalable though?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's what you're looking into.
There is a challenge there, right? Certainly the challenge is it scalable onto an online platform? That's debatable because we're talking about unique individual pieces. So it's not like this blouse that's vintage. I've got 20 of them in inventory. There's just one and it's in one size. So it makes it a little harder. It is scalable in that I know people. In fact, I have a client who owns a successful vintage clothing business in New York City, and she's got 3 physical locations and is doing very well. So it's scalable in that sense.
Yeah.
But that's the challenge with it. The other challenge, of course, with any of these kinds of things, is it a trend or is it here to stay? And that, the verdict is still out on that. I think that the younger generations, this is something that's going to continue to be important to them.
And environmental as well. The fact
Exactly.
of reusing.
Exactly. Yeah. This is clothing that instead of getting shredded or thrown away or whatever is getting repurposed, right? So there's a lot of value there that appeals to many people. But the slant that she's putting on is that my daughter lives in Manhattan in New York City, is that New York sensibility. So the magic ingredient is the curation that most people don't have enough confidence to go into a thrift store and say this and that go together. And even though that was in style in the 80s, it's cool again. She has that eye. She has that ability, right? Is that scalable? I don't know. That's another good, interesting part of it. So we're learning about the business and all of the different aspects of that business.
Oh, it sounds very exciting.
It is.
It should be great. And I want to loop back to the start with the podcast. So you mentioned right at the start that for you, a lot of the fun is the creativity side of. So just talk me through that a little bit about the creative. Have you always been a creative person? Is it something that's been natural to you, or is it something that you've sort of developed over the years?
No, I've always considered myself a creative person. I would have loved to. One of my early dreams was to have been an animator for Disney, but nowhere near the skill. so I wasn't very good, but I loved art in school and I loved expressing myself through art. One of the things my family will do is we'll sit down with coloring books and crayons and color together. So I've always loved Henry. That. Isn't that sweet?
Beautiful.
That's the soft side of me. So I've always loved that. I'll always love expressing myself through that. My mom, when I was in my late teens, she got into ceramics and she had a couple of ceramics businesses and I enjoyed that, the feeling of the clay and those kind of things. So I always have had that desire and that artistic desire. And then I've come to realize, maybe it's not for the same opinion for everybody, that when we create a business, it is a creative endeavor. It is why we're so afraid of it getting rejected, because it is something that we're creating and we're putting it out there, just like when we put art out there. And the world either tells us it's pretty or it's ugly, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why people hold back from starting something, is the fear of the rejection of it. Yeah. Now, there's also real fear that I'm going to lose my money and I mortgage my house and all that, right?
So for me, I've always considered myself not creative.
Not creative, interesting.
Not creative at all. Yeah. But what I did through my corporate career was I kind of thought of it as my own business. So I tried to put an entrepreneurial spin.
I see.
On the corporate career. So my podcast, when I first started it, I think my strapline was, I'm a corporate employee with an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's where it all came from. So for me, although not being particularly artistic, my dad was very artistic. He loved drawing, but it never really rubbed off that much on me. But I do see entrepreneurship as a creative. And I
think we are really all creative. It's just that we get this certain definition of what we think that means.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree. And I think that whole idea of you are creating something that you want to share. So whether you're a musician or an artist, you essentially do want to share it with the widest audience you can and for the highest value in most cases. So I do see there are definitely parallels between the entrepreneurial journey as well as the artistic side. But you mentioned that whole idea of rejection.
Yeah.
And you said a little bit earlier about feeling a little bit like the imposter syndrome, which I think everyone does to an extent with different things. The more experience you get, the less you feel that. You feel like you're validated in ways. But let's just explore that as an idea. And I'd imagine this loops back to your sales role as well, your sales roles. But how have you dealt with rejection, and also how have you managed to overcome objections when you hear them, when whether it's friends, family, clients, whoever it is? How do you deal with rejection and objections?
Boy, there's a lot into that, right? Because some of it has come from formal training. So when we're talking about dealing with objections in the sales process, I've been trained on how to best handle those. And a lot of that has stuck, right? I think that the biggest thing that we have to learn, and that I had to learn, is to try to separate it and not take it personally. Right. And so that helps. That is just what I'm putting forward right now is not of perceived value to you, and that's why you're rejecting it. It's not me. It doesn't mean that I'm not worthy or that I'm not good. It's just what I happen to have put in front of you isn't a fit, or doesn't solve your problem, or doesn't inspire you. And so I think that the more I think about it that way, the more it has helped me deal with the rejection. But I am no better now. One way that this comes into play, I think, Mark, is what people will say, failure, you learn more from failures, and failing is good, and you learn from your failures. And I don't disagree with that, but I'll tell you, failing sucks, and I hate every moment of it, right? So I learn from it, but boy, is it a painful lesson. I'd rather not fail again if I don't have to, because it does trigger those emotions that, am I any good at this? And for a period of time, you sometimes even lose that confidence. Well, do I know what I'm doing here? Especially when we take on a platform as podcasters and we're sharing knowledge. That's where sometimes it comes in and says, well, do I really know what I'm talking about? And then I gather myself, yeah, I do, because I'm not trying to put forth that I have all of the answers. I'm sharing my experiences, and here's what I have seen that works and doesn't work, right? Here's what I have learned. But yeah, dealing with that, I think, comes, you develop a callus, I guess, against it, and understand that it's not a personal rejection. It's just whatever it is that you've put forward. I have turned it, the whole imposter syndrome, for example, when I was in sales, I turned it into a superpower of sorts. Okay. A superpower that came at a cost, but a superpower. And what I mean by that is that I sure as heck was going to be prepared when I got on stage. And when I say stage, I'm talking about I might have been in a corporate conference room presenting to 20 people. I was in software sales. Yeah. So I might have been presenting to 20 people as to why our solution is what they needed to invest in. I have presented on bigger stages, but that's what I mean by being on stage. Yeah. But we all are in a lot of our businesses in one way or another. We're on stage presenting our position, our project, our idea, right? I was going to make sure that I was as prepared as anybody, because I was ready for that person who might say, Henry, you don't really know this, do you? And I'd be able to say, no, actually I have, because I have researched that. Now, what it meant is a lot of effort, a lot of anguish, a lot of sleepless nights getting ready for those things. But that's how I channeled it. That's what worked for me. Yeah.
That's so fascinating, because it's a similar story to me. So when I started the podcast, when was it? 2017, December 2017, I started it. And initially, I started at that time to be doing a lot more sort of presenting in teams or presenting to clients or conferences. I'd have to stand up and talk about our product that we were, and services that we were providing to people. And what I realized was that I, again, wanted to be so prepared for every question, every eventuality, that I realized that actually using a podcast scenario, and it was a very selfish starting point, and it's evolved into something completely different. But at the start, I was obsessed by self-improvement and sort of business. I thought, which it did help, was that by having to work out a structure for a podcast, 15, 30-minute podcast, quickly and succinctly, talk knowledgeably about my experience. I had to be really careful about experiences with the corporate, because there was trouble there. But being able to turn around things quickly and be able to present, and it's a bit of a cliche, but find my voice, was the starting point of the podcast. Mm. And so this has now led me to this path where every guest that I have on, I spend at least an hour working on a set of questions. And this podcast is a prime example. We've gone in lots of different tangents, which is joyous, which is a lot of the enjoyment I have. But I also have that structure that at the worst, and now we've only had probably 2 or 3 people who give monosyllabic sort of yes, no answers. We don't have many of them, thankfully, but we have had some in the past. And without that preparation, if I just winged it and went into a conversation for 45 minutes without that preparation, those are the times where you're going to have a 5-minute episode or you feel that it's not working. Now, I can make the most of even those opportunities because I've done this long enough to be able to then twist or change or pivot the way the conversation's going. But it all starts with that preparation. I know you're similar with your podcast.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well.
I sometimes I've tried to check it a little bit because I spend a lot of time preparing, but that's my style. And I was talking about this with a family member earlier this week about there's different styles, there's different shows, and there's no right way. It's just what works for you and for your style and for your show. For me, I need to prepare and know where I'm going to go with the conversation, but I still let it be a conversation, right? Yeah. So I think it just depends on our style and what works for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear some of the most naturally gifted interviewers on podcasts. But I kind of think, even if they're not doing it themselves and they've got a team of researchers doing it,
absolutely,
I bet all of the time, like even a Joe Rogan, where you can sometimes feel that he is riffing, and a lot of that is the comedian side of him being able to improvise and riff on things. He still has a structure in front of him that he knows where he wants things to go. And I think it's a bit of a fallacy, these ideas, unless you've got a 15-minute episode that you're just talking yourself and you can literally just riff on knowledge, experience, understanding that you've got. I think it's like so there used to be a program in the UK when I was growing up. It's called This Is Your Life, which was with a guy called Michael Aspel. And he always had this wonderful style of being able to go off on these tangents. He only had 60 minutes as well. It was probably heavily edited even then, but it always was a fascination for me that he was able to riff and find angles with people. If he had a comedian or a politician or whatever, they had a real mix of people. But he knew where he wanted to go. He had so what the style of the program was, he would have guests come on who had been in their journey and talk about parts of their lives. But yeah, he was wonderfully being able to go on massive tangents. But then he always knew the next guest was coming out in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2, whatever it was. So I think it's a bit of a fallacy, and I think anyone that's listening to a podcast and they would like to be a podcaster, and we do get some. I think it is important. The creativity is super important, and you are creating something for people to consume. And in media, you're trying to create something of value to people. But I do think also because one of the things I taught people how to podcast for a while, and it was interesting. I had some great students, but they stopped after about often you get people 3, 4, 5 episodes and give up. But I had people that were doing it for like 60 episodes.
Wow. And then
they would stop. And I just felt it's in a way a bit of a sadness. Mm-hmm. But they obviously saw value or enjoyed it to an extent. But to be a podcaster, there's many different hats. You have to organize the meetings, you have to prepare for the meetings, you have to do the conversation. There's a lot of juggling that you have to do. And yes, there's teams, there's people that can help you make that smoother and easier. But for you, coming to the end of the conversation, but for you, why has podcasting been so valuable for you in your career, in your life?
I enjoy the conversations. A few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was struggling with people who say, what's your hobby? What do you do for a hobby? And I really didn't have any hobbies. I mean, I did cycling and this and that and other things, but not really a hobby in a traditional sense. And I came to realize that my hobby, what I love to talk about, is business. Yeah. So the podcast satisfies that in me, number one. Number two, I'm a talker when you get me talking on the right subject. Now, I'm an introvert, so if you find me at a party where I don't know anybody, I'll be the guy in the corner stuck next to my wife, not talking to anybody. But when I'm on a subject and it's something that I enjoy, then I love having intellectual conversations, what I call intellectual conversations, right? At my level. I'm horrible at chit chat at a cocktail party, but this is something that I love talking about. So like my business and partner and I can talk about business forever. My wife will tell you, ad nauseum, it's like, stop, but I can have these conversations forever. So that's part of it. I enjoy it. I think that I've become a pretty good interviewer, good enough that even when I listen back to the episode, I don't cringe too much, although I still cringe even now. The people that I have met, you and I are a perfect example. I met you because I met, what's his name? Ethan. And so you came into that group, and that's how I met you. And that's how I met Rob. And I can name a number of people. I'm involved in a group now that I only came to because of Jennifer, who came on my show. We remained connected. And so that has happened again and again over the last 6 years, is interesting people that I would have otherwise not connected with, whether it has materialized into any kind of a business partnership or not, just friendships. You talked about it. You were talking about it during your episode on your birthday about how loneliness is a big part of it. I have always talked about that in business, it can be a lonely pursuit. Certainly COVID exacerbated that. Certainly the fact that I home office and have for the last 20 years exacerbates that. Certainly, it comes to the point where we recently moved to Florida where I don't have a large circle of friends. So it allows me to connect with like-minded people. And here's the thing. I've heard this from various or a couple of different successful people. I think that Steve Jobs had a saying on this as well, and so does Dan Sullivan. After I do an episode, 9.5 times out of 10, like after this conversation, I will be energized, not depleted. I will be excited, not tired. I might be tired in that I had to do it, but I'm energized about the conversation that I just had. That's what tells me I'm doing something that brings me joy.
So it's currently 7:24 in the evening in the UK.
Oh my.
And I could talk to you for another hour, to be honest, Henry. I 100% agree with that. It's something I have to be mindful with a young family, timings and things like that. But at the end of a conversation with you or with most of my guests, you come out of it and you've learned something. You've enjoyed the conversation. You've, as you say, you feel energized by it because you've gone deep into areas which, unfortunately, you don't often get the opportunity to go deep sometimes with anyone. And I suffer sometimes with that. But equally, you don't always be able to go deep with someone that you've never met before.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's a really interesting dynamic.
I don't know what other situation you would. It's a very good point.
Exactly. So I think it's an interesting concept. So look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They do not need a quick fire answer. The first question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Period. Just
any decision, marriage, job, life, kids, whatever it is, best decision.
Yeah. Easily having gotten married and then having had a child.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Oh gosh. Probably my parents, my grandparents rather, is who I'm channeling to their example, which is to be humble and to find the beauty in the small things.
Oh, amazing. They sound incredible people, your grandparents.
They set a very big example for me. Yeah, they've set a very big example for me.
Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Oh, in my career. The first thing that comes to mind is my longtime, often business partner, David Begin.
Tell me about a regret that you have.
Oh, gosh. Lots of regrets. Boy, as it relates to business, I'd probably coming back to, I would have liked to have stayed in the car wash business a little longer to have been able to monetize it a little bit more.
What are you most proud of? And you can't use your family this time.
Okay. Can't use my family. Then I would think it's what I've been able to share through the podcast to help other people realize their dreams of business ownership.
Amazing. And what does legacy mean to you?
Legacy is personal to me. It's what I'm going to leave behind that I've instilled in my daughter and that she'll then take forward. So what I've given her in the way of learnings and examples, and hopefully in shaping some of her character, that's hopefully my legacy.
Amazing. And lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
thehowofbusiness.com.
Fantastic. Look, Henry, thank you so much for an extended time with me spending.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
It's been a great interview and one of my favorites, absolute favorites. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Absolutely. We'll chat soon. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it.